Living in Alaska is not for everybody. But if you feel the magic and you make the decision you want to move to Alaska, then you're going to need to give some careful thought and planning to establishing residency. Alaskans enjoy some very special privileges, and those privileges require state residency. In this video, we're going to discuss some of those privileges and the requirements for becoming an Alaskan. And pay close attention because we might even tell you about a couple of programs that will pay you money to be an Alaskan. So stay tuned. So before we get started, if you find this information useful, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And if you want to support the channel even more, you can go to our YouTube homepage and become a YouTube channel member by hitting the join button. Or join us over on Patreon and become a member of the crew. Both of those memberships have perks like exclusive footage, resources, links to more info, and eventually we plan to do live feeds for members. Everything we're going to talk about in this video, there's going to be more information posted there. There'll be some helpful links. You can also look for us and follow us on Facebook nowadays. So, Alaska residency. What is it? Why do you want it? How do you get it? And how do you keep it? It's not as easy as it seems. Each of those privileges that Alaskans enjoy have different residency requirements for establishing and maintaining that residency. Almost anyone can become a resident of any state by just moving there, getting a driver's license, registering to vote, an address. But in Alaska, that's not all it takes to gain those unique privileges that we get to enjoy up here. So we really need to discuss those privileges individually and the residency requirements that go along with it. So first up is hunting and fishing. Alaska offers world-class hunting and fishing opportunities. Both residents and non-residents can participate in the hunting and fishing that's offered here. But in many cases, non-residents have more restrictive seasons and bag limits. For example, in the area where I moose hunt, a non-resident hunter his season is shorter by 5 days, and the non-resident has to restrict his harvest to a bull with antler size restrictions. Whereas as a resident, I have an extra 5 days and I can shoot anything with antlers on it, any bull. Also, the cost of hunting and fishing licenses and hunting tags are much more expensive for non-residents. A resident hunting license costs $45, and in many cases we don't even need to purchase a tag to harvest the animal. That's a separate part of the license that goes with it. For instance, we get a moose tag, but it's free. Non-residents, on the other hand, pay $160 for their basic hunting license, and the harvest ticket for a non-resident to harvest a moose is $800. So you're looking at almost $1,000 for a license to go moose hunting if you're a non-resident. The fishing seasons and bag limits are much the same as they are for residents and non-residents as far as the sport fishing, but there are fishing opportunities for Alaska residents only called subsistence and personal use fisheries, and they're more designed to fill your freezer and feed your family. And to be eligible for resident hunting and fishing licenses and privileges, you have to be physically present in the state with the intent to remain indefinitely and make Alaska your home. You also have to have maintained that permanent residence for 12 months prior to applying for the license. You also have to be not claiming residency in any other state or country. Incidentally, once you establish residency for fish and game purposes, you remain a resident until you take steps to establish residency somewhere else. So you don't have to reprove every year, and as long as you don't move out of state, then you maintain the residency. And a word of caution is in order. The regulations are there to protect the resource, and they're way more complex than we could cover in this short video. So you'd be well advised to study the regulations, ask the Alaska Department of Fish and Game any questions you might have. The Fish and Game troopers enforce all the regulations, including residency, very aggressively. Violations of the regulations can cost a person literally thousands of dollars. So do whatever you have to do to stay on the right side of the law. Do your own research. I'm just trying to give you some basics of how to establish residency for this purpose. Next up, we have the state of Alaska's Department of Natural Resources has an extensive land sales program with 3 ways to buy state land. There's a sealed bid auction that happens once a year, and it's restricted to residents only. The parcels that don't sell in the auction are available what they call over-the-counter, or OTC. You can literally buy those online, and you don't even have to be a resident for that. The third program is called the Remote Cabin Site Staking Program. It's restricted to residents, and you win by lottery the rights to go out and stake off an area that you want to purchase within a designated area. Again, that's for residents only. There is also, listen up veterans, there's also a once-in-a-lifetime 25% discount on parcels, certain parcels, when you purchase from the state of Alaska, but you have to be an Alaska resident and a veteran to get that. 25%, that's thousands of dollars. The residency requirements for these programs is similar to Fish and Game requirements, except that you have to have been a resident for 1 year prior to the sale or the auction. And another important difference is that with the Fish and Game regulations, you only are self-certifying that you've met the requirements. With the land sale program, you actually have to self-certify and prove it with some documentation. It's all spelled out in the Alaska Department of Natural Resources brochure, and I'll put a link to that in the member zone. That's part of the resources that'll be found in there. The University of Alaska. It's an excellent public university with a wide range of degree offerings. The larger campuses are in Juneau, Fairbanks, and Anchorage, and then there's smaller campuses throughout the state, and there are pretty robust online course offerings also. But just like any other state, the resident tuition costs much less than non-resident tuition. To qualify as a resident for tuition purposes, you must be physically present in the state and have resided in the state for 12 consecutive months prior to the add drop date for the semester you're signing up for. There are several exemptions, such as service in the military. There are also students that come from other states. They have a reciprocal agreement between the states that they offer resident tuition to those residents of those states. So if you fit into one of those categories, you would need to file a resident tuition assessment and show specific documents that they'll ask for. There's also a new policy that allows even non-residents to pay resident tuition as long as you're not taking more than 4 credits per semester. Next up is state jobs. Many job openings with the state of Alaska are restricted to Alaska residents. Establishing residency for this purpose is just a simple matter of being domiciled in the state. There is no minimum time that you're required to live in Alaska prior to applying for that job. Again, there are exceptions for people serving in the military, and if you graduated from a high school or a post-secondary in Alaska, you're considered a resident for state job purposes. Taxes, that's another big one. We're lucky to enjoy very good government services with a state budget that's funded by our natural resources. This makes Alaska a very tax-friendly state for residents. There's no state personal income tax, there's no state sales tax, and residency for tax purposes is just as simple as moving to the state and setting up household. Next up, 2 programs that will actually pay you to be an Alaskan resident. First, we'll talk about Alaska's Senior Benefits Program. That's a program that pays a small payment monthly to Alaska residents who are 65 and older. The amount depends on the senior's income and is subject to state budget restraints, but currently the payments cap out at $250 a month. I don't find any length of residency requirements at all, so I presume the senior only has to be domiciled in the state. And finally, Alaska's natural resources belong to Alaska's people. The oil resource that companies extract is taxed, and some of that revenue goes to pay for our government services. That's why we don't have to pay income tax for the state. And thanks to the forethought of Governor Jay Hammond back in the 70s, in my opinion, the greatest governor the state ever had, all Alaskans get to share in that oil revenue on an individual basis. We call it the Permanent Fund Dividend, or the PFD. The payment comes every year, and the amount varies from a few $100s to over $3,200. And that's every man, woman, and child who meets the residency requirements. But the residency requirements are a bit more demanding and complex than other resident benefits. And for obvious reasons, there are documentation requirements, and the rules are strictly enforced on this. We apply for the permanent fund checks every year between January and March, and the checks usually show up in October usually. A very important thing to keep in mind is you must have been a resident for 12 calendar months before you can apply for the permanent fund dividend checks. That's January 1 through December 31. You have to be here for that calendar year before you can apply. So to minimize, consider that your waiting year. So to minimize your waiting time before you can apply, you would want to show up sometime before December 31st, take a couple of steps towards establishing residency, and then January 1st starts your waiting year. Don't make the mistake of showing up in the middle of January, because then you will have to wait actually 2 years before you can apply, because you wouldn't have made it here for that calendar year. That first year you spend here won't be your waiting year. Kind of confusing, but just show up before December 31st, get a driver's license, register to vote, get an address by January 1st. You're also required to have and this is important, you're required to have the intent to remain a state resident indefinitely. So if you take steps towards establishing residency in another state or another country, like getting a non-Alaska driver's license or a resident hunting license in some other state, or even accepting a full-time permanent job in another state, you can disqualify yourself from that program by doing that, because you're showing intent not to remain in the state. You have to demonstrate intent to remain a resident of Alaska to keep getting the permanent fund. Once you do establish residency, you are allowed to be absent from the state. You're not a prisoner here 365 days a year, thankfully. You're allowed actually to be gone from the state for up to 180 days of the year for any reason. And there are some exceptions to the physical presence rule, such as serving in the military, taking care of a close family member who's ill outside the state, or attending certain kinds of schools that we don't offer here in the state. And another word of caution is in order here. The residency requirements for the Permanent Fund Dividend Program are fairly extensive, and they are strictly enforced for obvious reasons. People who cheat on this are frequently turned in by other Alaskans, because what determines the amount of our checks every year is they divide up the available funds between eligible residents. So if somebody knows you're cheating on it, they will call you in and they will throw the book at you. So cheaters get turned in and they get prosecuted aggressively. So let's talk about record keeping. As you can see, residency in Alaska is not a simple issue. It also has a lot of value to it, a lot of perks. So it's a good idea to keep good records of your move into the state, such as receipts. I recommend saving boarding passes, any travel receipts, moving and storage receipts, copies of your lease, copies of utility bills, voter registrations, just any moving expenses into the state, and anytime you leave the state, you want to be able to track that and prove that if an issue comes up. It's also a good idea to keep good contact information on a couple of people who can confirm your residency in the state, because they do ask for that in the application process for the permanent fund dividend. So that's probably more than you want to know about getting and keeping Alaska residency. And if you found this information useful, please hit the like button and the subscribe button if you don't mind. Fire away with any comments or questions down below. You can follow us on Facebook, and if you want to support the channel even more, you can become a YouTube channel member by going to our homepage and hitting the join button, or join us over on Patreon and consider becoming a part of the crew. Thanks for hanging out with us in far out Alaska, and until next time, be good to each other, because we're all in this together.